And some of the cities in general, they were all kind of. I stayed in some other cities that weren't as big. They're kind of a little more rural, but still, it's kind of cities, I guess. And their their transportation mostly is bus, kind of. That's their only public transportation, bus and taxi, I guess. And so in Cuiaba, mostly the capital, we take a bus, and they're just it's kind of how you see on the movies. Maybe they have some places here in the U.S. too, but it's just everybody's kind of crammed in, and they cram you in, so you're you're just kind of squished in. Just there's no room to move. You're just kind of holding the pole, and when you move any way in any direction, you're bumping into somebody, and so it's just they'll cram you in rush hour, like whenever he's going to work or coming from work, they'll just shove people in the door. They just kind of shove it. So if you know you're coming to your stop, you have to kind of work your way through people, about 3 or 4 stops before you get there. But that's the worst it gets. Sometimes you get on the bus and you're the only one there, and it's one of those where you pull the cord if you want to get off. That was our main transportation. In some of the smaller cities, they didn't have buses. They had taxis, and so if you go anywhere, you're walking, because if it's a small enough city, and we'd walk, I don't know, 30, 40 miles sometimes. Those were crazy days, mostly like 15 miles. But we'd walk, well, not 30, it seemed like that because it was hot. But we'd walk long ways. But we weren't allowed to have bicycles, but they used a lot of bicycles there. We'd see families we call it the family minivan. It was a bicycle. They'd have a regular bicycle with one seat, and they'd have one person sitting kind of on the bumper on the back, on one of those like little luggage racks. Maybe the mom on the back, the dad sitting pedaling, and then they'd have a kid or two on the little crossbar. And I think the most we saw was 5 people on a bicycle. There was the dad pedaling, and then there was a couple of kids in the front, and there's mom in the back, and she was holding a baby. And that was probably the biggest we've seen. And there in Brazil, it's kind of a hierarchy. Like the poorest people don't have anything. They don't have a bicycle. They don't have anything. And then the next one up is a bicycle. If you have a bicycle, you're pretty good. And then the kind of upper middle class you'd have a motorcycle. And same kind of thing. We've seen 5 people on a regular motorcycle, like mom, dad, kids. And then if you're really well off, you'll have a car. And so once in a while we'd have a member or somebody that would give us a ride in a car, and it was always kind of fun. And sometimes we'd even hitchhike, which I don't know if I recommend hitchhiking or not, but those were in some of the smaller cities that didn't have public transportation. We'd be walking along the road, and in some areas it's better to kind of work further out and find people who would be willing to come in and go to church. We'd hitchhike sometimes. We'd just kind of walk along the road, and my companion would just kind of throw up his thumb, and we'd go. And then we'd teach him as we were going also, which was turned into some of the most interesting teaching experiences was from hitchhiking. And that can be dangerous because in some of the cities we were in, we had to be in by 9, and there's some sketchy areas. Like in the area book, they always have like the areas to avoid. One of our areas was avoid everywhere after this hour, because we lived. It wasn't Cuiaba, but it was a town called Hononopolis, and we stayed in a place, and you would hear gunshots at night. And there was a lady that stayed in front of a daycare, and she would kind of watch. She was like a security guard, night security guard, and she told us all sorts of crazy stories that happened on our street. Not anybody dying, but like people be like mugged or different things, or there'd be gangs going past, things like that. We never ran into anything. Like as long as you were in by the time that the book said, usually you were good. We were in one city where we had to be in by 9. Like we lived in the center of town, and it was just kind of a rough neighborhood, I guess. And we never stayed out past 9 because we just trusted what the other missionaries had said. They're just kind of rougher areas, but they don't mess with the missionaries. They respect the missionaries. So it was kind of our safety. Even some of the gangs and stuff, they respected what we did, because we were around helping people, and they would come and some people would come and like shake our hand, and like they didn't want anything to do with the religion. They didn't want anything, that they'd come and shake our hand and tell us, I guess, kind of that they were watching over us, which was kind of cool. But because Brazil in general is kind of rough, but where we lived is probably the lesser, because places like Rio and Sao Paulo, they're known for their like all-out warfare with like gang warfare. Where we lived, it wasn't so bad. Like the whole Cuiaba mission, and usually as long as you were out past the curfew, the 9:30, usually it was rough anywhere you went. Because we didn't really live. I never lived in the center of any, like Cuiaba. Like when I lived in Cuiaba, it was kind of a neighborhood on the outskirts, and it was the roughest neighborhood in Cuiaba, and there there was a lot of members, and a lot of people, like everybody knew the missionaries, so we were pretty safe. But we'd hear about all sorts of things that happened after we got into our house. And I think probably the scariest time was when I didn't really notice it, but my companion told me about it afterwards. But we were just walking past like a pub, and a guy was just kind of yelling at us, and he was talking about his God, and he was pulling something out of his pants. And he was like, "This is my God, this is my God." And later my companion told me that he had a gun, but that was probably, he was drunk, and it was actually a really safe neighborhood, like one of the safest places we lived. But it was just like a one-time experience. But that was probably the scariest it got for me, at least. And basically, it's pretty safe as long as you follow the mission guidelines. Because all the really bad stuff happens really late at night. During the daylight, nobody does anything, which is kind of nice.